that there was a modest improvement in measles, partly because measles done by campaign is doing relatively well in Africa, although there have been two epidemics raging last 12 months. Vitamin A, slight improvement. Also, all of the things that are done by national campaigns are doing relatively well in Africa. The communities were able to improve a little bit. The big difference was in bed net, mosquito bed nets, huge increase, and therefore malaria prevalence, huge decrease over the last 3 years in all of the sites. Child mortality in 3 years is pretty remarkable, decrease by 25% from all of the interventions. And by the way, we have huge amount of data that underlies each one of these findings. So for instance, when you look at the different, at the 14 different sites, you see huge variations and a very rich context of why each one is different. So for instance, in Mali, the site did very poorly on child mortality, and that's because that was the one site where we had a lot of difficulty getting the government to agree to a point of service being free. Once we showed them the data, 3-year data, that showed that their child mortality did not decrease, whereas all of the other sites in the Millennium Village Project did, they dropped the fees, and the child mortality is just dropping in the last 9 months since we showed them the results. Education, again, basically it's been just modest increases. The main thing is the school meals, which we feel very strongly about because the school meals is what improves attendance, but it specifically improves attendance for girls. And so we found, by the way, that our gender ratio, the girls to boys ratio, went from 0.9 to 1.0. Maternal health, not much improvement in what the WHO considers the gold standard, which is 4 antenatal visits. We had a huge improvement in 1 antenatal visit, but not in 4. HIV testing hugely improved. Skilled birth attendant, this is quite a remarkable improvement in 3 years. And the contraception uptake, modern contraception, is respectable, but by no means satisfactory. Infrastructure in terms of water sources, sanitation, and telephony is improving consistently. And I just wanted to quickly show sort of my pet peeve, which is there has been a lot of criticism of the project, which centered around the fact that the project is not using randomized controlled trials, which is of course the traditional trials, the traditional design and evaluation mechanisms, but in fact our interests were different. We were not looking at specific interventions. What our goal was to show is to see if in fact you can in 10 years from when we started in 2005 to 2015, can you reach the Millennium Development Goals? That is the question, that is our hypothesis. Our hypothesis is that even in very poor rural areas, with input into food, health, education, infrastructure, business development, with local management, local scientific talent, with a modest investment from the external community, that you can reach the Millennium Development Goals by the year 2015. So we feel quite strongly that that does not evoke the need for, the RCTs, the randomized control trials, are irrelevant in this context, because what we're trying to learn about is what is not optimal or minimal set of interventions, but what is an adequate package that will get you to where we all want to get to, which is to help these communities get out of extreme poverty by the year 2015. So our metrics has to do with, we're motivated by adequacy or plausibility trials, which I'll talk about in a second. I just want to, since this has been quite a brouhaha stirred up by World Bank and others, I just wanted to explain why we really feel that randomized control trials are really not relevant in this context. So randomized control trials are absolutely trials that you need to conduct when you have unproven interventions, when you're trying to find out, does this drug work? Does BedNet decrease the number of mosquito bites? But in fact, in the villages, the basic concept is that we're using only proven interventions, because the whole concept is that we feel that we already have enough technologies, enough scientific evidence for interventions that will help these people get out of poverty, and so we're only using proven. The randomized controls trial are good for unproven tests and looking at efficacy. Does it or does it not work? Whereas we're looking at effectiveness. Will this integrated package achieve the goal, which in our case is, we want to know whether you can reach the MDGs at $60 per person per year of incremental funding by the year 2015. So what we're interested in is not does the BedNet work or does the fertilizer work. We know that, and that's the only reason we're using that. The question is, will this package deliver? Is the package adequate enough? And we're interested in learning about the timing, the sequencing, the management, the information flow to help all of this happen. So that's why we believe that an adequacy or plausibility trial is much more relevant. Randomized controlled trials are good for simple individual interventions. This, of course, as I keep harping, is really looking at a system of delivery of a complex package of many, many interventions. There are all sorts of positive and negative synergies, bottlenecks, and you can't learn about those until you actually go through it, learn about them, and learn from them. So you can't really have a preconceived, rigid model to begin with. Speaking of that, that's the other hallmark of randomized controlled trial, is that you have to stick to a rigid, standardized intervention of design and delivery, whereas ours is a very consciously and adaptive implementation, so that we're continuously assessing. As I told you, our M&E is such that you can get data quarterly, every 3 months, through the child count, which is the SMS-based data gathering support tool for the community health workers. We even have daily data, and so that allows for continuous assessment and course correction, which is very important. If you find out that there is increased mortality from such and such, why wait until 3 years later when the survey will show it? Why not do something about it right then and there, and have the management team, which is why I said one of the interventions being the management team, is very important, so that they actually look at the data, think about it, brainstorm with the community, and respond to it in real time, not 3 years down the line. And of course, it also allows adopting new interventions. When we started this project, there weren't, the rapid diagnostic tests were not used, and that's transformed everything in terms of malaria, because we used to worry about microscope, reagents, lab technicians who know how to read the slides for malaria. Now, of course, as you all know, the community health worker, barely literate, can do a rapid diagnostic test from a finger prick and see whether or not the child has malaria and treat right in the household. So that became available during the project. Telephony has made a huge jump, and of course it leapfrogged everything. And so this kind of the adequacy and plausibility trial allows this sort of adaptive implementation, which a rigid standard randomized control trial would not. And then the one that I feel the most strongly about is that, of course, in a randomized control trial, you need unexposed control groups. So we have introduced comparison groups just to squelch some of this concern. But in fact, I'm personally quite opposed to control groups, because I found it unethical, and we made the decision back in 2005 that it would be unethical, given the fact that we are dealing with proven interventions. Of course, it's not only ethical, but it's imperative if you're looking at the efficacy of a drug whose efficacy you're not sure about. But in this case, since we're dealing with proven interventions, then looking and gathering data from a community from whom you're withholding the proven interventions is by my moral compass unethical. Second of all, it would, even if it were possible, it would be hugely expensive, because again, we're not looking at 2 or 3 interventions. We're looking at a multitude of interventions. It's interventions in 5 sectors. So it's over 50 interventions. So if you really were going to do randomized controlled trials, you would have to have n to the 50th arms of the trial. And that we actually calculated would cost over $250 million, which if one of you could give us, we will gladly go ahead and do that. And then the last thing, which since we are doing comparison groups, anyway, in spite of my personal belief that it's not the standard to be held up to when you're trying to reach a particular goal, is that it's basically impossible, as we're finding out as we are doing the comparison, which is there is no such thing as an unexposed control group staying unexposed, because even in the comparison groups that we're using next to the Millennium Villages, even those groups are things are happening, thank God. Some of the Millennium Development Goals are, after all, slowly limping towards improvement. And so, roads do come in, NGOs come in. And then I have to say, a lot of the things that we're sort of demonstrating are actually influencing some of the regional interventions. We know for a fact, because we work very closely with the regional ministries and departments and agencies, and we walk through the Millennium Villages, we discuss, we brainstorm, and they often end up doing what they can for a limited amount of resources that they have. But for instance, the concept that we felt imperative, which is that all sleeping sites should be covered by a bed net, not just for children under 5 and pregnant women, has become pretty much the conventional standard. Malawi has taken on the subsidies of agricultural inputs, etc. So first of all, it's hard to keep controls from staying put and frozen in time. And second of all, ironically and I think fortuitously, some of the improvements in the controls are actually happening due to the things that were that the communities are demonstrating. No? You don't have to look through the messy slide here. I just want to, in terms of sustainability, which is of course the absolute bottom line, my quick and dirty way, because we don't have the time that I would love to have, my quick and dirty way of explaining that sustainability is within reach is the following. These are graphs of 8 of the 14 sites that we finished doing costing studies for. The others are ongoing, which is looking back at how much the interventions really did cost, not just a priori, which we know because we set out for $120 per person, of which we bring in 60, but that this is post-fact. And so, actually, if you could just ignore all these different, and look at the, just the average for the 8 sites. So the first bar is, of course, pre-intervention. The blue is how much money did the government spend in that area. And on average, these sites basically only had about $10 per person per year put in by the government in forms of whatever roads that they were there, if there was any schooling or healthcare. Government put in $10. Donors put in a couple dollars, whether it was PEPFAR, PMI, Global Fund. And then, of course, the community always is investing in its own